If you're in your 50s and 60s and thinking about the next chapter of your life, we firmly believe the videos on what happens next can help you think about that next chapter in fundamentally different but also vital ways. But here's the problem. We've now got hundreds of videos on what happens next. So how do you work out what videos are actually going to work for you? So what we tried to do in this video is really take inspiration from philosophy and work out what the insights we shared from a philosophical perspective can most powerfully inform the next chapter of your life. And in this video, I want to share a compilation of what we believe are our most important videos on philosophy and retirement, or whatever happens next, so you can learn from them and live the life you truly deserve. Welcome to What Happens Next. If you've ever wondered how timeless philosophical ideas, both from Eastern and Western traditions, can help you thrive in today's world, particularly if you're in your 50s and 60s and thinking about transition into what happens next, you are definitely in the right place. In this video, we'll talk about Stoic, Buddhist, and Daoist philosophy and how the principles that they used to teach thousands of years ago particularly apply to your transition today, how it applies to change, and how you can use those philosophies to think about the transition in life you're making currently. So without further ado, let me introduce the first video we believe is going to give you really unique insight into taking philosophical teachings and applying them to your life today. And the philosophy we explore in this video is Taoism, because I believe Taoism had a really unique insight in terms of cultivating peace of mind, dealing with adversity, and change and grief can be adversity, reframing challenges, and focusing on balance rather than chasing that often elusive and undefinable happiness. If you're seeking clear, reliable tools to help you navigate the challenges of the next few years as you go into retirement or whatever happens next, and improve your well-being and resilience, this video's for you. Now, I've been thinking a lot recently about the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom, because actually there's plenty of information and knowledge out there, more than ever before. But interestingly, with all of this information and knowledge at our fingertips, on our phones, on our computers, where do we get true wisdom from in the modern age? Now, I think the Stoics had a lot of wisdom thousands of years ago about the principles to live a good life. But I also think there's a lot to be said from some of the Eastern philosophies, particularly when we're thinking about our own next chapter of our lives, that chapter of our lives where we've been working and accumulating wealth for a significant time and thinking about what happens next. And I think there's 7 clear principles of Taoism, the ancient Chinese philosophy, that we can use to help us with retirement. The first principle I want to talk about is going with the flow. Because in Taoism, there's a principle called Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action or not doing. And that doesn't mean being lazy or doing nothing at all. Rather, it's about flowing with events instead of constantly pushing against the tide. And I believe there's a life lesson here because the Taoists talk about going with the flow, whereas the Stoics used to talk about focusing on what we can control, not worrying about the things we can't, but also amor fati, embracing life with all its nuance and shadows and dark and light, and living knowing that we're grateful and lucky to live through all of it. The good news is often, and this is my experience of speaking to my clients as a chartered financial planner, is that when we hit our 50s and 60s, we're starting to look like what a decent, natural flow looks like for us and how we can make the most of a bit more time. And that often includes having more time for ourselves and a bit more headspace. There's a brilliant book on this subject called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, written by the amazingly named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Took me a few times to pronounce that, I can tell you. And that book talks about getting us into a flow state and experiencing deeper enjoyment and greater creativity. We've all been there when we've done something and time has seemed to fly. And often that's because you've entered that flow state. So the Daoists knew what modern psychologists now talk about, focusing on finding flow instead of constantly pushing might be a healthier and happier way to live our lives. So let me ask you a question. Where in your life could benefit from letting things unfold more naturally instead of pushing so hard? And how do you get yourself into that flow state where you're doing something so intensely but enjoying it so much? And how do you get more of that in your life? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. And without further ado, let's talk about principle 2, which is finding balance. Life from a Taoist perspective is all about balance, harmonizing forces in our lives in a complementary way. And often in Taoism, that's symbolized by the yin-yang, black and white swirls that connect to each other with a dot in each. I'm sure you know the symbol, you've seen it loads of times. In nature, we see this balance everywhere, day and night, seasons of growth and seasons of rest. And the Stoics knew this. One famous Stoic quote is, "Nature operates in balance. There's time for everything and nothing is rushed." Now, applying balance when we're thinking about what happens next can be very practical. The temptation is, after years of work, a very yang in Taoism pursuit. It might be in your head to go into a period of your lives where all you're doing is relaxing. So Taoist wisdom suggests you have a mix. You balance activity with rest. You balance being social with solo, quiet, considered time. And this element of balance is why we talk about, and what happens next, the balanced well-being model, and why actually thinking about our lives in a greater degree of balance, like the Taoists do, is a really important principle of a successful retirement or whatever happens next in your life. Now, all of the principles that I'm talking about, and I talk about on all of my What Happens Next videos, will be in the What Happens Next book. To be one of the first people to read the book and get your hands on the book and potentially get a signed copy, feel free to join the waiting list. The link below is in the comments, or simply, if you're not watching this on your phone, take a photo on your phone of this QR code. It will take you directly to the waiting list, so you can be one of the first people to get access to the What Happens Next book. However, the important thing when we're thinking about balance is to dispel the myth of perfect balance. The reality is we can look at other people's lives and assume they've got it all sorted out and they've got the perfect balance. The reality for me and for my clients when I talk to them is finding balance takes work, but also takes a degree of recalibration every now and again to make sure that you remain on track. But a big question to ask when you're thinking about balance is, how do you balance your time? How do you balance time between doing the stuff you love and like, but also taking time for you? And what incremental actions, what tiny little steps can you take to make sure that you're recalibrating to make sure that balance works for you? Taoist principle number 3 I want to talk about is the importance of embracing simplicity. It's interesting. A lot of the conversations I have with my clients about retirement and what they really want to be doing, it's the simple stuff that comes up time and time again. It's the time spent with grandkids, walking the dog, a good quality coffee, travelling but in a meaningful way. Now, I've spoken about the importance of working out what your enough is financially on this channel before, and we'll put a link to the video where I talk all about that in the comments. But Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said it best when he said, "He who knows he has enough, or she, is rich." Now, whilst I'm not convinced by the phrase the best things in life are free is entirely true, many things that I love can be achieved at a relatively low cost. Spending time with people you love and like can be free. Being in nature is free. But evidence shows that constantly striving for more, be that money or stuff or praise, means that psychologically we're never going to be enough. So the question I'd answer you here, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, is what's the one thing you could simplify in your life right now? Is there a possession, commitment, or worry that you could release to feel lighter? By thinking about what enough means in your life, you might already discover you have what you need to live a happier, healthier life full of well-being. Let's talk about principle number 4 and the importance of nature in our lives. Now, last year I moved house to the Essex coast, and to be perfectly honest, as a Londoner, somebody who'd lived in quite an urban environment for many years, I wasn't sure the move was a particularly positive one for me. But where I live now, I'm 10 minutes away from the forest, but also 10 minutes away from the estuary that leads onto the sea. And there is a huge advantage into being close to nature. I read a book recently called Daoist, written by neuroscientist TJ Power. And in this book, TJ talks about the fact that being in and close to nature enhances many of the chemicals in our brain that lead to positive emotions. The Taoists knew this too, and the philosophy and the evidence is now clear. Spending a decent amount of time in nature is brilliant for us. So the question is, what small step can you take to spend a bit more time being surrounded by the natural world? Let's move on to principle 5, and that's letting go. My experience is that often when clients retire, they're also letting go of a lot. Not only are they letting go of income, they're also letting go of their old identity and often some of their purpose. Throughout life, we accumulate loads of different attachments: our professional identity, job titles, daily roles, and even some of those certain ego-driven ambitions. Stepping into retirement can feel like a loss because letting go of that career that gives you life structure and purpose is difficult. And for some of us, the right thing to do as we enter retirement or later in our lives is to downsize and get rid of some of our possessions, literally, physically letting go of stuff. Now, Taoism talks about the fact that if we cling too tightly to things that are naturally changing, we create unnecessary pain for ourselves. Instead, there is a real freedom in accepting change and effectively disentangling ourselves from the past. You are not your job. You are not your stuff. You are whatever you choose to be. And as your life changes and changes form, you need to make sure that you're able to let go of whatever is in the past so you can really focus on what happens next. So the question that I'd ask in this area is, what elements of your life, if you're approaching retirement, do you think you're going to struggle with letting go the most? And how and what can you do to make that transition a little bit easier and make sure it's as smooth as it can be? Taoist principle number 6, one that I really love, is be like water. Because if there's one visual image that the Taoists love, it's water. Loads of them talked about the fact that water is gentle and unyielding, but given time, it will break the strongest rock. And that's what the Taoists talked about all the time. Being rigid leads to breakage. Being flexible leads to resilience. And think of water floating around rocks in a stream. It doesn't try and smash through the rocks. It simply flows in the available space, but is patient, consistent, and persistent. And in time can even wear down the stone. Now, I think there's real value in the Taoist principles here when we're thinking about what happens next. Resilience, flexibility, the ability to adapt, change, and evolve are all really important skills to have when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives. There is going to be change and challenge when we think about retirement, but allowing us to be more flexible, both in what we know, what we learn, what we understand, and adapt that growth mindset is going to allow us to retire more successfully. One of the things we talk about a lot in What Happens Next is the benefits of low-cost experimentation. Now, not all of these experiments are going to be successful, but trying stuff out to see what works is a really important step when we're thinking about what happens next. And actually being flexible enough to try new stuff is the Taoist principle in action. You might try a new activity like a yoga class or join a local club, but find that it might not be your cup of tea. However, the power of flexibility lets you shrug and say, that's all right, I'll try something else tomorrow. Flexibility and curiosity go hand in hand as well. And we know that in our 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond, a growth mindset, the ability to make sure that we're continuing to evolve and learn is fundamentally important to live happier, healthier lives. So the question I'd ask in this area is, in what areas of your life could you be a little bit more like water? Are you holding on to any rigid routines or beliefs that might be better served with a little bit of flexibility and ultimately resilience as you move into this chapter of your life? The interesting thing about stories is they're just stories that we tell ourselves. And interestingly, what we need to consider sometimes is whether those stories serve us or hold us back. Principle number 7, and one which I'm increasingly thinking about a lot, particularly when modern technology doesn't allow us to do this well, is be present. Taoist philosophy reminds us that being fully present and enjoying the journey is an important thing to do. After decades often striving towards goals, financial or otherwise, and future milestones, it can feel unfamiliar to slow down and simply be in the now. Yet this might be the greatest opportunity we've got in this chapter of our lives. The opportunity to enjoy and savour every day without the hustle, bustle, rushing of working life. So my recommendation is take the time today to celebrate the small wins and be grateful. And the question that I'd ask here, and I'd love for you to answer this in the comments, is what are the small wins you can celebrate today, and how can you make today a good day, even if it's a super ordinary one? So I believe Taoists can teach us a thing or two about retirement. What do you think? In the next clip, we're going to explore what Stoic philosophy can teach us about managing change. Now, I've been a student of the Stoics for the last few years. I think the Stoics have got some really unique insights that even thousands of years old can apply to us today. And I like the idea of how often the Stoics can take some complicated ideas and give us some frameworks and tracks to run on to make our ideas a little more simple and improve our well-being. I'm a massive advocate of using money as a tool to live the life you want. So you might assume I'm a fan of building wealth until we decide to stop permanent work. And then it's spend, baby, spend. I think I need one of those big money guns. Now, whilst I'm not suggesting you get the big money guns out and start shooting pound notes, there's a strong argument to say that if we're approaching a time in our lives where we're thinking about either retirement or what happens next, we should spend our hard-earned wealth on things we always wanted to do. However, there's a challenge. Not every pound we spend is equal. There's pretty robust modern research that tells us spending money on certain things makes us happier than other things. And interestingly, the Stoic philosophy on those elements align with the modern research. So in this video, I want to explain the 5 principles of a happier money from the amazing book, Happy Money, and what the Stoics used to say about life and money and how it aligns with those principles. Just to make sure that you, if you're thinking about retirement or what happens next, can spend your money to live a happier life. Welcome to What Happens Next. Now, I'm a firm believer in using money as a tool to live the life you want. I've recently finished a book actually called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins, which talks about using money as a tool to get some of that stuff that you've always wanted. And actually, sometimes our balances are misaligned where we accumulate too much wealth without the sufficient time or health or desire to spend it. So looking at that balance and living intentionally might be a way to go. And there is a balance to be met, but it is important to be intentional about the action you take. But if we think we've got enough, if we think we've got our version of enough money, I suppose the big question is how do we spend it to maximize our happiness and well-being? And the good news is there's plenty of academic research that talks about this particular subject. One of my favourite books is a book called Happy Money by Elizabeth Dunn. And it's interesting how much of the modern day academic research aligns with the ancient Stoic wisdom of the likes of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. So let's explore the 5 lessons we can learn about how to spend our money to make us happier and how those lessons actually mirrored what the Stoics taught us all those millennia ago. The first lesson I want to share is to buy experiences instead of stuff. Why? Because the reality is spending money on experiences has been proven to make us happier and create lasting happiness the way stuff just doesn't. It's really interesting when you think about, let's talk about travel as an example. You're planning a trip and you get the happiness for anticipating planning that trip. You take the trip, you share experiences with the people you love and like in a way that really makes you happy. But also, you get to create the memories that you get to take with you forever. The thrill of a new gadget or outfit does fade over time. The evidence shows this. But the memories that you get to build and cherish by sharing new experiences, the evidence is shown last over time. So if you're looking to spend money to make you happier, take a holiday, take a trip, go out with the people you love and like, learn a new skill, because those happy memories of doing those things will last a lot longer than just more stuff. A part of it is because of the way we reminisce, because of the way that we really value good memories. I was talking with my older daughter in 2022. I did a trip with my daughter Charlotte where we visited 15 European countries on a huge epic train trip across Europe. And it's so interesting because we still get happiness from the memories we created and looking back at the photos we looked at along the way of that trip. Lesson 2 is a really interesting one because the research that Elizabeth Dunn did for Happy Money says that it's really important to make treats a treat. If we spoil ourselves all the time, interestingly, the research says, the impact of spending money on spoiling ourselves just becomes a norm. It's called the hedonic treadmill. Our new normal becomes what we actually spend. Whereas actually, if we want to boost our happiness, what we do is have luxuries that are really good to have, but stretch them out, have them less often. By doing this, we avoid that hedonic treadmill where we get used to those luxuries, but keep having unique and novel treats we can continue to savour. The Stoics used to say, the indulgence without restraint, the Stoics used to say, is counterproductive. And actually, it's really interesting that the evidence from the 21st century completely aligns with that Stoic principle. So the science says if you enjoy the finer things in life, make those finer things a treat. Definitely do them. Make those finer things a treat. And that's the key to getting more happiness out of the finer things in life. Lesson 3 is spending money to buy back time. I talk a lot about, for many of us, including you, the finite commodity you should focus on isn't money, it's time. Now, that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't make smart decisions with your money and actually know when you're achieving financial independence. It just means being more conscious and more intentional about how you spend your time. So you're doing it in a way that improves your well-being overall. I've had so many conversations over the years, particularly with clients in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, where they realise their biggest commodity, the one that they're running out of, isn't money, it's time. And how to spend it is always a challenge. We realise that even though in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and maybe early 50s, we are time poor because we're building a life and building a business. Sometimes we hit that stage, often at the stage you're probably at, when you're thinking about what happens next in your life, where we need to pivot to look at how we spend our time and spending it for the better. So, what can we practically do to make sure we're spending our time as meaningfully as possible? One thing we could do is look at the jobs we don't particularly get any satisfaction from and don't enjoy, but need to be done, and see whether it's cost effective and more beneficial for you to outsource. That might include a gardener. That might include a cleaner. That might include, instead of trying to do that piece of DIY work that you know isn't going to come out as well as it could, just employing somebody to get that job done for you. That might include working with somebody like me to support you with your financial plan. The evidence is clear. Spending money to save you time is a proven way to make ourselves happier. Why? Because we get to spend that time we've saved doing something we actually love. Seneca, the Stoic, talks a lot about value in time. He talks about often how frugal we are with money and wealth, but how we often give away the thing that's most of value, and that's time. It's interesting. When we're busy doing stuff, I do wonder how conscious we are of how we spend our time. So the question that I asked you today is, how are you spending your time? And when was the last time you looked at whether you're spending your time as effectively as you could and getting the most out of both your time and your life? Lesson 4 is pay now, consume later. Currently, our culture, our individualistic and capitalist culture, is full of buy now and pay later offers. However, the research, the science behind spending money to make you happy, tells an interesting story. It tells us to do the opposite. It feels really counterintuitive, doesn't it? But the psychology around this is that if we had a bit of anticipation on the money we've spent, we'll get the happiness in advance. I spoke earlier on in the video about travel, and I know that when I've spent money on a trip, I start to anticipate because I know what's coming, and I get to relish the experience before it actually happens. The Stoic Epictetus had a lovely phrase about this. Nothing important comes into being overnight. Even grapes and figs need time to ripen. If you want a fig now, I will tell you to be patient. First let the tree flower, then bear fruit, then ripen. The Stoic mindset is all about not rushing, expecting, wanting, and needing instant gratification. They applaud the discipline of pay now, wait, then enjoy, because it shows self-control and wisdom, in their opinion. By delaying gratification, you appreciate it more when it arrives, and the science tells us that you're going to be happier for it. Lesson 5, our final lesson, is spend money on others. This is one I've spoken about a lot. In fact, I published a recent video on what happens next, talking about the impact of being kind to others on our own lives and the positive impact on our own well-being. When we talk about investing in others, we might mean gifting, treating, or donating, using some of your money to benefit other people. And these could be family, friends, charity, or your community. But the studies consistently say the same thing. Pro-social spending is good for our own well-being. And here's where it gets interesting. A recent global study found that if you donated to charity in the past month, that was equivalent to your own income doubling in terms of the impact on your own happiness. Another study reported that if we look after members of our adult family or relatives, often that leads to overall better health and happiness, because it seems that we're engineered from a evolutionary perspective to help other people. Elizabeth Dunn, in the book Happy Money, had a great piece of research on this, where people were given the opportunity to gift a Starbucks card to somebody else or spend it on themselves. And ultimately, everybody who gifted it away and helped somebody else had better well-being from that simple exercise. We are social creatures. And even though we want to use money to look after our own needs, we do know that helping others is an important part of the mix when we're thinking about getting more happiness and well-being from our money. And the Stoics understood this all those millennia ago. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, wrote that what injures the hive injures the bee. And even though we're certainly more individualistic now as a culture, looking after others is the way that we improve our well-being in a number of different ways. And I think it's interesting when you talk about kindness, because I think doing good for others is ultimately doing good for you. Stoics believed in virtue, kindness, generosity, and justice. They were all core values of Stoics. They didn't see charity as a sacrifice of money, but both as a natural duty, but importantly, when it comes to this, a source of their own contentment. And actually, all the evidence points to the fact that when you give, you gain. Now, interestingly, I wrote a book a couple of years ago about kindness, and I talked about the benefits of being kind to others on your own physiology, and the fact that often being kind to others is also being kind to yourself. So the question I'd ask is, who can you help? It might be as simple as taking a friend to lunch or sponsoring a family member who's doing the marathon. It might be as big as helping the kids or grandkids buy their first home or giving to a charitable cause you believe in. These examples of pro-social spending are all designed to help the person you're helping, but also improve your own well-being and make you happier. So there you have it, 5 lessons we can learn about using money to make us happier that both the modern research and the Stoics both agreed with. And next, we're going to share what I believe the Buddhists can teach us about going from where we are today into the next chapter of our lives. Because the Buddhists are known as being fairly spiritual. I'm not particularly spiritual personally, but actually what's often lost in Buddhist philosophy is how practical it was. The amount of things they taught us about managing stress, thinking about worry, reframing our circumstances, the importance of mindfulness, acceptance, and managing a life so that we get ultimately closer to that longer term peace. Now, it might sound surprising, but Buddhist philosophy has a lot to teach us about financial anxiety and finding money peace of mind. You see, the Buddhists, while having a number of beliefs and a fairly deep number of things we can learn from their philosophical teachings, were also realists. They recognise the fact that we need to live in the material world. And actually, most Buddhists live in that world and still share Buddhist philosophies. There's only a handful, actually, the devout Buddhist monks who renounce all their worldly goods, who live less materially. You see, it's interesting because even though we don't think of the Buddhists in this way, they encouraged us to think about what financial freedom means to us, but also caring for our responsibilities as a society and community and doing things that made collectively the world a better place. And this is why I think it's interesting, because I think the Buddhists have a unique insight in their teachings about the importance of practicing non-attachment to wealth. Of course, it's healthy to do the right things with your money, understand that money is a tool to live your life, and enjoying your money is important. We need to recognise that actually having all of our identity tied up in the amount of wealth we've got isn't a particularly helpful way to live. One core teaching in Buddhism is that suffering often comes from grasping and attachment. When we hold on too tightly to anything, including the idea of financial certainty, we set ourselves up for stress. As Buddhist writers noted, it isn't actually about how much money you've got, it's how you feel about money. The quote that I love is grasping isn't about how much we have, it's satisfied when the heart isn't grasping. Because a person with modest savings can feel content, while a millionaire and billionaire may still feel there's a gap in their lives. Because the reality is no amount of money will ever feel enough unless the mind thinks it is. In our previous video, we spoke about how mindset is such an important part of our financial well-being. Often, part of the challenge we face in an individualistic society is the messages we get are all about not having enough materially. Even if we've got enough, we think it's not enough. However, I know both in my own life and in the work we do with clients, you can understand what enough looks like for you. I think there's two parts of that process. Firstly, it's getting clear on the facts. Look at your number, look at what enough looks like for you. And you can do that with a financial planner, but actually, there's a video which we'll put a link in the comments to that will help you do a ready reckoner so that you can work out what enough works for you. Because having a plan, even if you've not reached financial independence yet, gives you one thing that's really important: clarity. Now, do that with a financial planner or do it yourself using the ready reckoner that I've recommended you do that. But it's also important to look at the second part, and that's the stories we tell ourselves about money. The reality is that most of our fears, financial or not, are a bundle of thoughts, feelings, and more importantly, stories we tell ourselves. Some stories help us do things in our lives. Others might be designed to protect us. Others simply might do us no favours at all, but because we've believed them for years, they think they're the truth. And I'd suggest that one of the important things that you can do to move forward is question the stories you tell yourself about your life, but also about money. Now, I've done some amazingly insightful interviews with the likes of Christine, Catherine, and Dennis, all about the stories we tell ourselves about money and how we can get better at that relationship with money. I'd suggest you definitely check those out, and the links to all those interviews will be in the comments. Because the reality is, when you've got financial clarity, even if you're not achieving full financial independence yet, together with a positive money story, you can achieve one thing a lot more earlier than normal, and that's a feeling of enough. Even if you're not enough financially yet, having a clear plan and taking incremental actions towards it can make you feel better earlier than doing nothing at all. Now, as we're on the stories we tell ourselves about money, I want to cover off one particular Buddhist related topic, and that's neutrality. You see, the Buddhists didn't consider money to be bad or good. Material wealth in Buddhism is a neutral tool, like a hammer, and it's got the ability to be used skillfully or unskillfully. Because money, at its best, can help us live the lives we want and support the ones we love to do the same. Money can also clearly be used for the opposite, but my experience is most people want to use money as a tool to live the life they want and support their families. So my one question I'd ask is, how do I use my accumulated wealth to live the life I want? That's a really important question for you to ask. And how do I use my money hammer, my tool that is money, for good, either for me, my family, or the broader community? And what's the next practical step I need to take in order to do that? The other Buddhist tradition I want to talk about is Sangha, which means community. No man is an island. We don't go through these journeys alone. And it's really difficult, I've found, to build your own financial plan because you are biased. Even if you're smart, you're going to be biased. Firstly, when you're building your financial plan, Talk to the people who the financial plan is going to impact, your partner, your kids. Potentially, if you want an independent viewpoint from people who are close to you, but it's not going to affect them, you might want to ask your friends and colleagues for a bit of support. Sometimes a casual chat over the conversation about money is really important to have, can reveal new ideas, or at the very least reassure you that your anxieties are shared. If you've got grown children, I'd recommend you start a money conversation with them too, because my experience is that having a decent money conversation with your adult kids relieves a little bit of pressure and allows that conversation to flow better. Professionally, if you want to understand money or you want support around money, there's a bunch of resources, many of which is for free. There's retirement planning workshops, there's education seminars, there's online forums for retirees, as well as paid for professional help. You can get specific advice. And I'd suggest that getting help, understanding that no man is an island, and making sure you've got the help you need to live the life you want in this next chapter of your life is going to be important. There's a lot the Buddhists can teach us about living the right life with our money and do it in a way that makes us more happy and improves our well-being. Firstly, understand that money is a useful tool, but over-attachment can be psychologically or emotionally healthy. One way to avoid that emotional attachment is understand that money is simply a tool designed for us to do one thing: use it so we can live the lives we want. Therefore, the stories we tell ourselves about money are often unhelpful, and that's why it's worth examining the stories we tell ourselves so we can reframe them in a more positive light. And lastly, don't do it alone. Get help when it comes to money. Speak to the ones you love or get professional help. Virtually every philosophy for thousands of years understands the importance of a trusted community supporting you to make decisions, including the Buddhists. So if you need help to clarify your plan, it's worth speaking out and getting it. So these videos, I believe, have brought thousands of years of teaching to you so that you can think about how you can apply that to either the transition you're making into retirement or whatever happens next, or the transition you've recently made. My aim and aspiration is to help you live a life in the next chapter of your life with more confidence, with more clarity, but also with some tools to allow you to ensure that your well-being in this next chapter is as high as it possibly can be. Now, you can get more information about the work we do at What Happens Next. Simply go to www.whathappensnext.life, or alternatively, if you'd like a copy of the What Happens Next book when it comes out, which will be the ultimate compilation of all of these ideas, all you need to do is click the links in the notes below. There'll be a link to the waiting list, or if you're watching this on your phone on a screen, simply use the QR code below. I really hope you've enjoyed this compilation, and I look forward to seeing you on What Happens Next soon.